exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
One pill makes you larger, one pill makes you small, and the one that Jaime Maussan gives you don't do anything at all. Go ask Alice when she's 10 feet tall. Feed your head. Feed your head.
Okay, Tim. Now that you're in the proper state of mind, why don't we do some psychic questing?
Let me see. I'm getting an impression that there's something important under this rock.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Let me see.
What is it, Tim? A treasure? A magic mighty crystal?
Nope. It's a bottle cap.
A bottle cap? Okay, I have another impression that there is something special under that log you're sitting on.
Oh, okay. Well, hold on. Let me check to see. Oh, wow.
What? An ancient sword? An alien skull?
No, it's even better. It's a coded message from Tina saying that it's time to start the show.
Well, psychic guessing can wait. We've got more important things to do. We've got 2 guests tonight. And you know what night it is? It's Exploring the Bizarre night.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Well, that was a little. That was like a Bill Shatner thing, kind of like overdone.
Well, you needed to do it like Bill Shatner then.
Well, you know, he actually taught me about the art of acting.
He did.
I once did an interview with him years and years ago, backstage at Dick Clark's $10,000 pyramid, and he sat there and told me graphically with his hands about his sighting of a UFO in the Mojave Desert and of his subsequent chase on a motorcycle by the Men in Black. And I said, "Wow, this guy really can lay it on." And anyway, I took, that's where I got my inspiration to some extent. But now I'm my own Mr. Creepo. I've got my own, acting inspiration here. And
well, I was going to say, didn't Shatner say that later on that he'd made the whole thing up?
Yes, he did, just for me, I guess, I suppose. But it was a very elaborate story, you know. And some people chastised me. They said, "Oh, you believed him?" I said, "Wait a minute. He was not put to a lie detector test. This was for an entertainment newspaper. It wasn't like some serious UFO sighting. He was on, just starting out on Star Trek at the time, and it was supposed to be entertainment, and it was jolly good story. But I got back at him years later. In fact, with Jaime Maussan to some degree. Bill has a show that was shot up in Quebec called Bill Shatner, William Shatner, Weird or What? And they invited me on as an expert, which of course I am. And there was this story about a supposed alien captured in a trap. Well, the thing kind of looked like a made-over mouse or something like that. And I felt sorry for the animal, but later the person who captured it had a barrel of acid thrown on him or something. Crazy Jaime Maussan story, but that's what we've come to expect. Anyway, they wanted me to say on the air that this was an extraterrestrial. Well, I told them I don't think it's an extraterrestrial, but it could be a jinn. And I guess if this thing really had existed at one time, how could this thing get into a spaceship and fly here? And why would it go to the zone of silence in Mexico? I don't know, but it seemed more real that it was a jinn, and I guess Shatner took the pardon the expression bait, and so there we go, or maybe he didn't. I don't know, but
his producers did.
That's my Bill Shatner the story, and my Jaime Maussan story, for that matter. Anyway, we got more important things to do this evening, Tim, I do believe, than chat away here. Well, maybe that's pretty important, too. But let's get on with our... Ooh, yeah, that's Jaime Maussan barking at us in the background, I think, yeah.
Yeah, he's took his...
There you go. Okay. Anyway, why don't you tell our vast audience, including the barking dog, hey, you're doing a Jeff the Mongoose book. Now we got the talking dog we were looking for.
That's right. That's right. Finally.
Yeah, there you go. Wait, if you look, you will find. Anyway, on with the show and tell us who we're going to be speaking with tonight.
Right. Well, tonight, Tim, we've got two excellent guests. Now, both of these gentlemen, this is the first time on Exploring the Bizarre. And so I'm really happy that we were able to get them to come on the show with us. Well, first of all, we have Charles Toppin. Now, Charles in rural Shropshire, England. And when he was young, he experienced several psychic events, which in hindsight may have been connected, he says. He said his first UFO sighting at 8 years old triggered an apparent ability to see spirit forms and have spontaneous out-of-body experiences. These phenomena sparked a passion for books on these and related topics, which has, he says that interest has never gone away with them. Now, when in school, he got a small band of like-minded fellow teens together, and they began to experiment with the Ouija board in the vain hope, he says, of contacting the space people, as George Hunt Williamson wrote about.
That's right.
That's right. 1954 book, The Saucer Speak. He says that events escalated, leading to bizarre Morse code signals on a domestic portable radio, and we definitely have to talk about that one because I've always been fascinated by UFOs and radio contacts and things like that. So now Charles says that years later he was involved with another group which met to use the Ouija board in an old Tudor hall in Warwickshire. I'm not even going to try to say that. I can say these words when I'm practicing, Tim, but then when I get on the air, I can never say it. So this period of activity.
Practice one more time.
Toy boat. Say that 5 times fast. This period of activity included working alongside renowned psychic investigator Graham Phillips and Andrew Collins. The results were exceptional, and the group received many apports in the form of books, gemstones, cartouche cards, and a wonderful photograph. And through the work of several groups, Charles became part of what is popularly known as psychic questing in Britain. Now, Charles has spent many years in studying Tibetan Buddhism, where he first learned about apports, and he loves to carve wood, play Delta blues, and runs the questinghour.com, which is dedicated to the golden age of psychic questing. And as well, we have Red Pill Junkie, and I'm just so happy that we're able to get Red Pill Junkie on the show with us. So now Red Pill Junkie says that he's a agnostic gnostic. I love that. He's a walking conundrum and medical physical oxymoron with emphasis on the moron part. Now, this is what he wrote. I'm not saying this. Don't send me nasty letters, people. This is the bio that Miguel wrote himself. The mysterious Red Pill Junkie leads a double life. By day, he serves as Grand Master in the International Sacred Order of Luca Libre. Am I saying that, Tim? You know that better than I do, the championship wrestling?
Yeah, Lucha Libre.
Lucha Libre, okay. At night, he pursues his lifelong study of everything considering mysterious and or paranormal, a term he personally detest. And when he's not exploring the web looking for his daily fix of Fortiana, he can be found blogging, doodling, fooling around, and offering his services as news administrator at the Daily Grail, one of my favorite websites, by the way. I visit it every day. And he also regularly participates in other websites and podcasts like Mysterious Universe and now Exploring the Bizarre. So now he patiently awaits the return of the mothership in Mexico City. So, Tim, let's welcome our two guests tonight, Charles and Pill Junkie.
Happy to have you both with us, and the grilling will start right now.
Yeah.
You know, I gotta ask our first guest an important question. Does he prefer to be called Red Pill or just plain Junkie?
I prefer Red Pill or RPJ for short.
Well, now I think I know where you got the name, but maybe some of our listeners are not that familiar with the term Red Pill.
Well, unfortunately, the term Red Pill has been recently hijacked by what I will call extreme political activists.
Oh, no.
And right-wing nut jobs. Imagine that. I got myself the term, and I've been using it for at least, 12 years at the least. I got the term because of my love of two things that seems to be separate, but I found that they were deeply connected. One was the books written by Carlos Castaneda, who made a splash. It's probably a name that is not well known nowadays, but back in the day, in the late 1960s, he was just as famous, maybe more famous than Timothy Leary. He even made the cover of Time magazine at the time. He wrote the book, The Teachings of Don Juan, A Separate Reality, Journey to Ixtlan, Tales of Power, many other wonderful books. And I remember reading those books when I was just finishing college, and I became totally hooked. And then almost 20 years ago, in fact, I think that in 2019, this movie is going to be 20 years old. I saw The Matrix, by the Wachowski siblings, starring Keanu Reeves and Lawrence Fishburne as Morpheus. And when I saw the movie, I felt that it was deeply connected with the things that I had studied in Castaneda's texts. This idea of an old mentor who picks up a young apprentice who calls who is to be the one, to be the anointed one, and through the use of substances that have the capacity to alter your perception of reality. In the case of Carlos Castaneda, there were peyote and other hallucinogenic plants, and in the case of Neo, Keanu Reeves, it was the iconic Red Pill. That is the way in which you can finally see an expanded vision of the universe. So that is why the term stuck with me, and I decided to use it.
Well, we have had Philip K. Dick's fifth wife Tessa on, and of course there are many people, including her, that say that the Matrix was actually based on his concept of reality. And I've done a book recently that comes to about 450 pages, which is The Matrix Control System of Philip K. Dick and the Paranormal Synchronicities of Tim Beckley. So I mean, myself, I think we are living in a computer simulation of some sort, that there really is a matrix. And in this book, I kind of lay it all out. What you say, Red Pill? I mean, are we in somebody else's reality? Are we living in parallel worlds at the same time, or is this desk in front of me as solid as it seems to be?
Well, it's really nice that you bring Philip K. Dick in the conversation. I have a big respect for him and his work. It's incredible how prescient his work has become after he passed away.
Well, yes. I mean, he is now. I guess his heirs are doing quite well because the number of films keeps increasing and the books keep getting reprinted. While he was still with us, he did not see too much of that remuneration himself. In fact, he passed away before the first film, which I would believe, Tim, was it Blade Runner?
Blade Runner, yes.
Was released.
Yeah.
He did see a first cut of it, but he never saw the final version of it. And if you go back and you watch this YouTube clip, which I think is even up on our Mr. UFO Secret Files channel on YouTube, back in 1977, there was a press conference at a science fiction convention in France, and he was before the panel, I guess, in front of a microphone, and he gave this dissertation about how he thought we were living in a computer simulation and parallel universes and all this, which is quite interesting because he never owned a computer. But be that as it may, everybody in the audience kind of looked at him like he was just totally flipped out and crazy. Because, as you probably know, science fiction people kind of detest anybody who might actually believe that there's anything to the the unusual, the weird, the bizarre, the uncanny, because they have been told by their leaders, the great Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and so forth, that we're all a bunch of nuts out there. And he had his own way of thinking, and at the time, it was not easy to convince people of this. But now even physicists, am I right, are talking about the fact that we may be living. And so, I think we are, man. It's all a grand master plan. It's either a grand master plan or there is no plan. And somebody Xeons ago flipped the switch, walked off the space station, and is going by. The computer is going by itself. I mean, there's a couple of scenarios you can come up with, but in this book, I've got like 50 synchronicities, and we're not talking about waking up and the clock says 444 or thinking of somebody, and they call on the phone the next day. I mean, we're talking about stuff that's so strange and so bizarre you would think that I made it up, but I don't have time to make anything up.
Right. So here's the thing. What I see in Dick's insights, what I consider him to be is just one of the most recent people who are giving the latest iteration of something, an idea that is actually incredibly old.
Is that right?
And this idea is something that was a subject of attention by the early Christians. And these early Christians were called the Gnostics, right? And these Gnostics also, like Dick, obviously they didn't use analogies or thinking in computer terms, but they were thinking that the world was kind of like an illusion. It was kind of like a trap conceived by some higher intelligence. They called that intelligence the demiurge. And his minions were the archons. And if you see that in terms of the movie The Matrix, you will see that as, the architect, and the archons will be like the agents controlling the Matrix and trying to keep people asleep, trying to keep people from not waking up to the reality that in the world that they live in is in fact not the quote unquote real.
Why? Because we could change that situation if we found that to be true.
That is a really good question. I think that in the case of the Gnostics, they weren't trying to change the world per se, but their ultimate goal was to liberate themselves from the prison of the world. The same way, maybe similar to what Buddhists try to do when they try to liberate themselves from samsara, from this wheel of karma, and to reach nirvana, right? And in the case of ourselves trying to change the world, well, recently I've been very interested in the work of someone who you may have had on your show already, Tim, Jeffrey Kripal.
No, I don't think we have.
Okay, well,
okay.
We'll need to now.
You should definitely get him, because he has written some of the most fascinating books in recent years that also have a deep connection with the UFO phenomenon. One of those is Authors of the Impossible, in which he writes about people like Jacques Vallée and Whitley Strieber and even Charles Fort. And another is Mutants and Mystics, which is a really interesting book in which he lays like a comparison between what was happening in the 1960s with SLN and the human potential movement, and all this research by the CIA on remote viewing and all this thing, all this idea of psychic phenomena. And on the other hand, there was pop culture with the comic books and exploring ideas by the late Stan Lee of the X-Men, the mutants, and people with superpowers. So there was this really interesting way in which popular culture cross-pollinated with actual phenomena. And one of the theses that Jeffrey Kripal subscribes to, and I think that is really interesting, is the idea that, all of us are characters in a story. But the moment that you realize you're a character in a story, then you are able to actualize yourself and, in a small manner, or maybe in a big manner, write your own story.
That's interesting. Because I found out now I could write my whole. It's kind of late in life still to write my whole story. Well, actually, I am writing my whole story, but
right.
It's in pen and paper, I suppose. And anyway, Tim, you go ahead. Yeah.
Well, no, I was just going to say that that sounds somewhat like a variation. And actually, it's what I'm going to say is the variation, but the popular movement based on that book, The Secret, which really took a simplified, a very, very simplified look at that whole, that whole idea. It's like you said, this is something that's been, kicked around for, generations.
Exactly. Yeah. And like you said, The Secret is a very commodified idea that is actually has roots in very ancient not concepts in Western esoteric thoughts, right? Things that have been part of the underground, because they were chased by the church, chased by the establishment, chased by governments, and now they're being rediscovered. And unfortunately, with The Secret, they're being repackaged.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because we have to go to our break. When we come back, we'll have more Exploring the Bizarre.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. In the first segment, we were talking with Red Pill Junkie. And now we're going to bring in Charles Toppin. Charles, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's very early in the morning here. I don't know whether to say good morning, Los Angeles, or good evening, Los Angeles.
It's like 3:35 there a.m. right now for you, isn't it?
It is, yeah. My cat gave me very strange looks when I came down this morning.
Well, we really appreciate you getting up at this ungodly hour to be with us, and so I want to start out, and I expressed this desire in the first part of the show, but I want to ask you about your early attempts to use the Ouija board and the radio to try to contact UFOs. Because, Tim Beckley and myself, we've both been fascinated for years about these kinds of stories. And so, I mean, to talk to somebody who actually did this and, with some degree of success is pretty fascinating.
Well, as far as I can tell, it was George Hunter Williamson, who I know you're going to quote from, who got a message via the Ouija board that brought Adamski and these other 8 witnesses out to the desert to have this supposed contact with the spaceman Orthon. Most people don't realize that, but well, you tell us the story, Charles. I mean, because I know that. No, are you old enough to have been around when George Hunt Williamson was still kicking?
Well, I'm 65 now, and okay. I exhausted every book I could from our local library. After I saw something when I was 8 years old, and it was we would consider a nuts and bolts craft. Now, you had the airships, then you had the nuts and bolts saucer shapes, then you had lights in the sky. Something else will come after it, I feel. But I was 8 years old, and I saw this thing. Nobody knew what it was, and the only time I got any idea what it might be was in an annual called The Eagle, which we used to have across here. It was a weekly magazine. It had the Mekons and Down There, and there was something in that made me sit up and think, that's what I saw. And I told my dad, didn't want anything to do with it. It was just fiction. It was a kid's thing. Now, what happened was I said to somebody, I'd seen this thing, and they said it was a flying saucer. And I was young, but I got as many books as I could, asked as many people as I could. And when I was a bit older, when I was into my teens, I got hold of the Saucer Speak. I'd read Adamski stuff. Dino Crispedon, all of the people that I could get books on, Truman Bethram, anything I could get hold of, however scrappy, however, even the things in Fate, I got hold of as much as I could. Oh, yeah. Even my pocket money used to go on this stuff because I wanted to know what it was.
Me too. Same thing. Yeah.
And what happened was, Tim Beckley, you would appreciate this. You remember Brinsley the Poor Trench?
Well, yes. Now you're involved with his organization, Contact. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right. Well, yes, Brinsley and I corresponded, and he invited me over, and I spoke to his UFO group at the House of Lords.
Well, this is great. This is what I love about this, because we were probably corresponding with him around about the same time, because I was pulled out of school. I had a UFO sighting where I'd called and again, this is something I would love to discuss with other people. I had this feeling that I must go outside, and I didn't know why. I was pulled outside to look in the sky. It was a very small cloud. It was the only one in the sky at the same, at that time. And this silver seed, almost an identical one to the thing I'd seen when I was young, flew into this cloud, and it didn't come out. And I called my mum, and she said, I can't see anything. I'm sure it was there, because mums believe things that little kids tell them very often. They're very forgiving. And what happened was I joined Contact, and I was young, probably about 12 or 13. And I wrote up to Brinsley, the Poor Trench at Contact, saying I'd seen this thing, and he said, thank you very much. He was really good. If anything else happens, please feel free to get in touch. Well, by that time, I got a small group of people together at school, and we did the Ouija board, and we started getting results. And I wrote to him again, and I had the letter for so long, and he said, just because somebody from another planet tells you to do something, you don't necessarily have to do it. And be very careful. I think he was one of the first few people I ever heard using the word mindful. Be mindful that they don't always tell the truth. And I thought, as a young one, I got dragged out of school to have my picture taken, still in my school uniform, holding a book on UFOs. And I was in the local paper. It was such a big thing. I ridiculed for quite a while. But also, people came up to me in the street and they said they'd seen this thing. So the George Hunt Williamson was the first time I read something and I thought, wow, and it really made such a deep impression upon me. I was into radios. I mean, this is something that got, you would appreciate this. I had a BC 348 and it was my pride and joy. It was an American Air Force thing, black crackle finish, had the converters with it. I had a 19 set, which was a tank set. And I used to spend as much time as I could listening, and the bands were fairly clear then. You could go up onto 20 meters. That was pretty clear. You could hear stuff from America all the time. Now with this set, I was desperate to hear something, and I thought, if they're out there, I'm up for it. And much was happening. Got the group together at school in the geography room. I think about this. And we did the Ouija board because we wanted to contact the space people. And it was directed by me. These guys said, okay, we'll give it a go. What's the worst that could happen? And we had this whole series of numbers. It was bizarre. Almost like a binary code, like a barcode on something. And we got in touch and we said, okay, if you're really out there, show us what you look like. And this took about a week before we got anything coming through. And then it said, look, window. And we looked out of the geography room and a light dropped out of the cloud cover, which was pretty low at the time. And it went back up into the cloud. And I mean, to be honest, it shook me. Even now, I've not spoken to many people about this over the years because it's so far away in my past. At the time, it was a big thing for us, but I've had so many things happen since, just ordinary things as well, life. I still have to pinch myself. And it took off from there. It really took off. And the thing you're interested in is the Morse code on the radio, isn't it?
Yes, I am.
Okay. On the BC 348 at night, I remember hearing it was a totally clear channel. I was waiting for somebody, an amateur, a ham in Norway, to come on. He used to use about 3 or 4 watts of AM on 80 meters, and it was a really good signal. I would wait for this guy every night to see if he was coming through. And on this clear channel, something came through that I didn't recognize until years later. And it sounds like a cross between commercial Morse and over the horizon radar. And it obliterated the set completely. There was you couldn't get anything else apart from this, and I discounted it because I thought it was interference from somewhere. Now, the seance stuff at school that progressed, this thing kept telling us it was to do with Melchizedek, Solon, Solon. I mean, I couldn't find anything about it, and there was nobody really we could ask at that time because it was so much undercover. And it was so secret, and it was something, if we'd been found out or somebody ratted on us, I mean, the school teachers, for the most part, being devout Welsh chapel people, I think we'd have had quite a ruckus, to be honest, so we kept it quiet. A friend of mine who was pretty religious, said, I know that name, I've heard it somewhere, but it's probably in the Bible. And that was it, really. Jacques
Vallée has written extensively about that.
But I can't find it. I've Miguel mentioned this. It's really great to have Miguel here because he has a clarity I don't have anymore. I'm getting pretty vague and woolly. His insights into stuff are fantastic. The Melchizedek thing, we never pursued it, but it seemed significant because it was recurring. It came up in automatic writing. Only fairly recently have I found out the significance of the name, and that was prompted by Miguel, really, who's very good at finding the links between things. With the radio, I knew some Morse code because my grandfather had been a Morse operator in the First World War, and he could read commercial Morse, and it was so fast, he had to write it down in shorthand. He was fantastic, and he taught me basically how to do the key. And we did the Ouija board one night, and I explained this on Greg's show. We were babysitting these kids, and they were upstairs. They were sound asleep. We got this thing together, and it really, really, really did do well. And we were near to a bank where we used to go sky watching. So it was right underneath the shelter of this bank, basically. And we did this thing. And I said, okay, can you put Morse code on the radio? And it said check. And this was spelled out on the board, CHECK, check. And I said, okay, can you do Morse code on the radio? And it said yes. And it really sort of, and I said, can you put the letter D on the radio? Darted it. And there was this pause, and it said check. And I said, darted it. And it said check. And this little, I can still picture it now. It was a little blue port, actually quite a big one now, because it had two 9-volt batteries in to provide 18 volts for quite an old transistor circuit. And it was a great sentimental value for me for years, because it had all these little pirate stations that we used to have in the UK around the British coast. It had little scratch marks where you could find them. And this thing kicked into life, and it was it was just on a clear spot. It was at the top end of medium wave, or AM, and it was a clear spot because there was lots of space on the bands at the time. And I remember it to this day. I remember it because I sat there with my couple of friends, and I thought, it's not going to happen. And I sat there, there was this pause, and all of a sudden it almost felt like it was a swelling. The signal rose from being white noise into suddenly, da-da-da. And it really, I can't tell you how much. I've seen, people have talked about when they had a poltergeist, people have talked about when this happened and something else, and the shock value of it. That was the first shock value that made me really wonder what we were dealing with. But we'd only ever seen or heard the good stuff. Everything that happened in the Hunt Williamson book was good. These were space brothers. They were friendly. They wanted contact. They were trying very hard to make contact and guide people. And the little hippie in me at that time, that became a big hippie later on, I believed this stuff. I'd written to Desmond Leslie, and I'd included a stamped address envelope with an international reply coupon, and I had Adamski's autograph. It took 3 months for it to come back, but it came back. It was a venerated object in my house. I believed in the Space Brother. I believed in all of that stuff, because why not?
And are you saying that you're less prone to believe in that today?
Very mixed feelings. Very, very mixed feelings. The biggest, coming back to the Morse thing, and I'll come back into that. I then asked if it could do some more, and it said, what else would you want? And I just said dad in Morse. I did it, and it came out with that. And we sat back and thought, we're going to leave it. But what happened was, as you know, through that book, there are many references to the techniques they used and klystrons and things. I was very, very lucky. My Saturday job was repairing toasters and kettles in the days when you could get spares for them, and the odd radio, valve radio and things. That was my Saturday job in a repair shop. And the guy who actually owned that was an old man by even then, and he was a G6 US, Eddie Reed. And I would go into him and say, look, I'm reading this book, and they're using klystron. They're using impulse transmitters. Do these things exist? What are they? And he was a radio amateur. He was really very, very well up on microwaves at the time. And and he would illustrate these things. And he would say, come around to my shack and come and see what I've got. And he was building klystrons. He was doing stuff at that time, which reinforced what I'd been reading in the books. It's fantastic for me to find, to have this man come up and say, actually, it's all possible. And do I believe? Am I still the old hippie? Yes, I am. Do I still believe in physical UFOs? I'm very undecided.
Yeah, one of the things I always thought it was peculiar, maybe, that the believers in the the nuts and bolts Space Brothers, UFOs and things like that a lot of them, and yourself included, communicated with them, through either like telepathy, channeling, or Ouija boards and the like. And even as a kid, I was like, okay, now how come, or why would advanced a physical race communicate with people using those kinds of methods? I mean, now that I'm a little bit older, I can see where that could be possible, but at the time it was when like a lot of us was more embracing of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. It's just like, okay, why would these beings use those kinds of methods a lot to communicate?
And there were a lot of events like this going on. George Hunt Williamson might have been one of the first, but there was also a fellow out of Chicago, John Otto, who had built a communications device. And over the years, I started to collect reports from people who were picking up messages or signals or codes on their ham radio operators, and there were scads of them. There was Calvert, Texas, where these things were talking to 3 or 4 people, ham operators, on a regular basis. There was Lumberton, North Carolina, that I'm sure we all know Lee Spiegel. He went down there on behalf of Dr. Hynek to investigate these messages that were, I say messages, I mean, I don't know how. Well, some of them were voice messages. Like I think the one in Lumberton, North Carolina, said that we're in a ship that's circling above the whatever parallel, and
it's like 500 miles up in space.
Yeah, and it was going on for on a regular, I would say, nightly basis for a while before the signals weren't coming in anymore. And then, of course, you have, you being over there, Charles, in the UK, you had the very well-known case of the Ashtaron or the Ashtar Command that took over a television station, which is peculiar, if nothing else. I mean, radio transmissions, it seems to me, are a heck of a lot easier to take over a television broadcast tower, because I lived behind one that I rented out to some people. We found that we could, just for a joke, we could shut it off and nobody at the station would even know it was turned off.
I love that.
Well, they were playing, it was their own fault. They were playing classical music. That's what
but Tim, a lot of these, radio communications started because somebody got, say, like a psychic message, or a Ouija board communication, or something along those lines that told them, go to your radio, tune it to such and such frequency, or go to your television and turn it on to channel 2, and we'll talk to you.
Well, nobody knows this, or very few people know, that George Adamski's contact in the desert was set up by George Hunt Williamson through a Ouija board. Is that not correct, Charles? I mean, are you aware of that?
Do you know, I'm not aware. Do you know, this is. I'm really pleased to get onto this, because when I did the show with Greg, I had quite a few people write up, and the people that found me, because it's quite an unusual name even in this country, and they said, I'm a G4, G4 something call sign, and or somebody wrote up saying, I've been in broadcast transmitters for 40 years. People were really very, very interested, and when you wrote to me saying about the contact with the hams and so forth, I found that fascinating, because I didn't know this. You see, when we did our sketch in school and we got all of this stuff, it led to my triangular shaped UFO experience, which really, I mean, I'm not allowed to swear on this, but it really put the screaming willies up me, and I didn't touch this subject for a long time. It was just too real, and it was. I was only about 15. I wasn't even 16. I thought about this today because I hadn't started full-time work. I was still doing the repair job, and I'd left school. And so at 15, possibly coming up to 16, and that was the thing that culminated in it. Now, I didn't know about the things you were talking about, that other people had been contacted. With our stuff, nobody said that it couldn't happen. Nobody said that these things, there was we had no other reference point other than the books, and we believed the books because obviously if this bloke, Hunt Williamson, had been lying, somebody would have come along years later and disproved it or put up a rebuttal or something in print to say otherwise, and nobody done that. And I thought,
Jim Mosley would have come close. He claims that George Hunt Williamson pushed his wife off the side of the cliff. Well, that was a total hoax. I knew Jim Mosley. I worked for him in his office in Manhattan. One thing about Jim, very humorous guy in his own way, but he was often influenced by people without ever having checked into the statements that they made. I mean, he would even believe Philip Glass would say the most outlandish thing, and then he'd come back and say, well, Philip Glass said it. Well, so what? I mean, anybody can say anything that they want. You got to go out and do a little bit of digging, yourself and make up your own mind. That's what I tell everybody. And how they listen.
Yeah, you see, we got results. We actually got results that we didn't expect. And in a way, we did expect them because you just follow, you follow the book, you get the Ouija board, you do this, that, and the other, and these things will happen. And they happen to us. And we just accepted it. We were very surprised, very pleased, very quietly, wary of it. But it happened. The triangular thing is the one thing, with this feeling that you've got to be somewhere. You've got to be there now. You've got to do this thing and follow it.
Well, we're coming up on a break here in just a few seconds, and when we come back, we want to hear about the triangle, right? The triangular thing. And we'll be back in just a few minutes time. So everybody, get your time warp ready, and we'll see you shortly.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to the second hour of Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight, we're talking with Charles Toppin and Red Pill Junkie. Now, before we go back with Charles, Miguel, I wanted to ask you, just real quick, how did you and Charles get together to bring his story, over here to, I know he was on first on Greg Bishop's Radio Mysterioso, and I'm not sure if he's been on any place else now besides our show, and we'll just say it's just been Radio Mysterioso on our show.
He's also been in Where Did the Road Go with Soraya Askeith.
Oh, okay.
So how did we meet? I think he apported my house. Well, in a way he did, actually, now that I think about it, because you see, what happened is that very early this year, I did a show with Gene Steinberg for the podcast. Mm-hmm. And at one point of the conversation, we were talking about, UFOs, abductions, and all of that. And I don't know, you probably know by now that I'm not really in agreement with people who go with the usual, easy, nuts and bolts explanation for this phenomena. So I was kind of like proposing the idea of, okay, so maybe these implants that alleged abductees are finding on their bodies maybe they are closer to upwards or stigmata, the wounds of Christ that deeply religious people, saints, Catholic saints, are said to present, and obviously this some form of unknown psychic phenomena. And then a few weeks later, maybe a month or so, I receive a letter from Charles telling me that he listened to the show and that he was really excited that I mentioned upwards because he had been involved with all these movement, the psychic questing movement, and they had been receiving a lot of upwards, and that's how we managed to like meet online. And from then on we started to have this conversation, a conversation that I found so fascinating that I immediately alerted Greg Bishop, who is one of my best friends in the field, my best friends period, and I told him, dude, you need to listen to what this guy is saying, because I think this is something that the UFO community should take a better look at, this idea of psychic question and this idea of people getting together in some kind of like modern seance and receiving upwards. And the reason why I found this idea of the upwards so interesting is because of thoughts that I've been having with regards to Jacques Vallée and his investigation on alleged metal samples from UFOs.
Right.
And I had the fortune of actually be part of an interview with Jacques Vallée on another podcast, in which he explained to us how the isotopic ratio of these samples are so unusual. They are not of extraterrestrial origin, meaning they are not from meteors or something that were not produced on Earth, but at the same time, they are not typical Earth metals, because they seem to be re-engineered at a molecular level. And I remember when I listened to that, something clicked inside my head, and I asked Dr. Jacques Vallée, does this mean that we're dealing with some kind of agency or some kind of intelligence that is capable of transforming energy into matter and vice versa? And I almost fell out of my chair when he said, oh yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. Right? And this idea, converting energy into matter into energy, that's the final goal of the alchemists, right? We're talking about alchemy here.
That's right.
And we're also talking about, in a way, upwards, because what Charles and his friends were experiencing and were reporting and they were witnessing right in their kitchen table was a physical object materializing below the table, right? Something that wasn't there and it is suddenly there. And modern science doesn't have a way to explain that any more than it doesn't have a way to explain how something could arrive from maybe another universe or another dimension or another realm, use a hell of a lot of energy to convert that energy into a material object. And in this case, a UFO, a seemingly metallic UFO. And then once their business is done, they disappear, pop out of existence, the same way that sometimes apports are also disappear.
Well, Tim, you had experiences with apports and the houses that supposedly had poltergeist phenomena attached to them.
Yeah, just one incident where we saw rocks fall from the ceiling in front of us, and I know that Charles was saying that the apports that he saw, a lot of times the agent or whatever is causing it is shy and doesn't want you to see the process. Well, with us, we all were sitting there on the couch watching these rocks. I mean, it looked like that they were falling through a hole in the ceiling, but there was no hole in the ceiling. And then they fell on the carpet in front of us. But I mean, I've talked about this before, and we went.
No. Well, didn't you also mark some of the rocks and throw them outside, and they would return?
Yes, yeah. I marked them with a magic marker, and then tossed them in the cornfield behind the house. And about a minute later, they came back. I still have them in my house here somewhere. It's been a number of years since that incident.
They've disappeared. They've disappeared. That's proof.
No, they're still around someplace. Of course, I've had people tell me, like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have brought bring the poltergeist in your house with you. It's like that never happened.
Well, charge them rent. Charge them rent if they show up. That's what I say.
Right. Well, okay, Charles. Now, before we get into the apports and the psychic question, I know Tim wanted to hear your story about the triangle UFO that you saw.
Yeah. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. Just a second. I apologize for that. I'm struggling at the moment. My throat is swollen, and I'm starting to go down with something quite heavy, I think. Okay. The recap is we got this small group. Now, 2 or 3 of us repeatedly, we were encouraged. We were almost. We had this feeling, this overwhelming feeling. We must go up on the bank near where we lived, and we would see something. Now, we'd asked a few times, "Can we see your craft?" One of these craft, and they'd said yes. And we had this feeling that we must go upon there that night or a couple of nights later, but at a particular time. We had to be there at 10 o'clock. And it wasn't a verbal thing. It was a non-verbal, be there at that time. So there was 2 of us in particular that turned out to be really good at automatic writing. And I think it was down to the other guy. And what happened was we got this thing, go up on the bank that night. Now, I was at work that day. And this guy was coming up to see me. I was going down to see him. We both met on this road, and I said, "We've got to be up there tonight." He said, "No, I've been feeling this all day. It's quite important." Went up there. We saw the Big Dipper was in the sky, and it was inverted. And that could probably tell me what time of year it was. And this light came up from the Shropshire Plain vertically, zigzagged all over the place. That sort of falling leaf maneuver. It it followed the Big Dipper around, and it went stop. Flash, stop, flash, and it marked it out quite clearly. It seemed to be indicating that, and it went back down into the plane, came back up again, and it did this a couple of times. It was really quite clear. It was about the size of a pea, probably just a bit less, at arm's length, and it went. Now the thing is, when I got home from that, I was sharing my bedroom with my youngest brother at the time because the house was being redecorated, stuff was going on. And I thought, well, if that's it, I didn't see a craft. All I saw was a light in the sky. And through the curtain windows, I was lying on the bed, looking through the curtain windows, and this really big thing appeared. And even now I can see it. I can see it almost quite clearly, even after all these years. You're talking about 1969, 1970. There was, it started off as just a line, which was what you see as a 2-dimensional thing. And as it turned, it got bigger and it became a triangle. One big light on the middle and one at each corner. And it was side on. So I could see this thing quite clearly, this big triangle. And it just faded. And it was there. It seemed to be there for a few seconds to materialize, to go. And it disappeared. And after that, I sat up in bed and I really did think that I'd lost it. I really thought I'd lost my marbles because we all knew that these things were saucer shaped. We knew that they were round and stuff like that. I'd never heard of a saucer shape, triangular craft. I'd never heard of one of those, and that's what I saw. After that, we had telephones ringing and nobody being there. Electrical stuff broke down. Again, more stuff on the BC 348, but very, very odd sounds, really. And it faded after a while, and I really didn't touch any of that for years and years. And then I came across one of John Keel's books, and that was the real thing. Coming back to what you said earlier, Tim, about these things can be whatever you want them to be, and they tend to follow those things. The first time I ever saw that illustrated was in a Keel book. And one of the things I found to be true through psychic questing and so many other things connected with the paranormal, Keel, in one of his books, said, whatever you're looking for, whatever conclusion, whatever feeling you have for this thing, whatever your hypothesis is, the next 6 results will confirm that. And I found that to be so true all these years later. And I thought, yeah, here it comes, number 6, number 7. Yeah, and it's flipped. It's become something else. And we had that with the psychic questing, with the UFOs. Anything I've ever been into that had a paranormal feel to it, and there's been enough. And it's not like I've gone looking for it. It's, just lucky circumstances. I've never told anybody about the black dog experience yet.
Oh, yeah, let's hear about that. I want to hear about the black dog.
Well, this is one of these things that happened off the back of it happened around the time of the UFO thing. When we used to go to a youth club in the small town that I lived in, and a man called Vivian Worthington used to give talks because he lived in India. He was a member of the British Wheel of Yoga, and he'd studied yoga. He was really good at what he did. He had eyes which were what you call quite spiritual eyes, very bright, blue-grey eyes, like Yehudi Menuhin, very much that sort of figure. He would give talks on dowsing. He was a very good dowser. He would give talks on his life in India, waking up in the morning and hear the yogis in the caves doing the Om, hundreds of yogis all doing this. You do all of this stuff. And he lived down in a Welsh valley, not that far from where I'd been. And I used to go and stay there with him and his partner at times. And just up the road from there was a yoga center where they taught Western yoga. They taught the journey of the fool through the tarot, astrology and things like that. And I started spending time there. At that time, this valley was the center of quite a lot of stuff going on. And there were magicians that lived at the top that were doing ritual magic. It was a very intense time. Not bad, just intense. And one night I was with a guy that Ken Ratcliffe, his name is, he's dead now, bless him. And he ran this centre Tannigarth, and he would pick me up from Chirk, which was probably about, say, 10 miles away, maybe less. He would pick me up in the car, this real old rattled banger with the exhaust held up with string and things like that. He wasn't the best driver. And when we were driving down this valley, he would say things like, do you trust in the universe? What happens if the divine providence and, wanted to look after you and all of this sort of yogic stuff? He would switch the lights off, the headlights. We'd be careering down this thing. And it's great. It's almost Gurdjieff. How much do you trust? And we went skittering all the way down this valley. And of course, the thing is, you knew the road well, and if there was anything coming the other way, you'd see their lights. You put your headlights back on. But at that age, it really got me. Now, the entrance, this is a long rambling story, I apologise, but the entrance to Tannigarth was quite a wide entrance, but you could pass it in a car quite easily, and it wasn't always good to negotiate. So he used to love to drive right down into the valley, right to this one place, turn around, and enter the entrance to Tannigarth. So he's driving into it from the left-hand side. We went down to the churchyard and we stopped there. Well, he was doing something and fiddling around. He said, something wrong with the car. At that moment, the two of us saw this thing came over the wall of the churchyard. And it jumped down not that far from where we were, and I turned around and I looked at it, and I really didn't like the feeling that came with it. But you see, on hindsight, did the feeling come with the thing itself, or was it just engendered in me? It was that my reaction, my survival instinct. And we looked at this thing. It was the size of It was a huge dog, and it looked dog-like. You couldn't confuse it with a Shetland pony. You couldn't confuse it with any other animal. It wasn't a mega-sized badger. Just looked like a huge dog, and it turned around and it looked at us, and the eyes were really strange. Now, the eyes weren't that fiery, but they had a sort of luminescence to them. When you see owl eyes caught in the light, they have that, or a cat's eye. It had that quality about it. And I looked at this thing, and I didn't know what to say. And Ken he didn't say anything. Now, this was a man who really was a master of his own stuff. You know, he when we used to do Krishnamurti or Alan Watts or Ram Dass, any of that stuff, he was there with it. He was called the International Hermeneutics Society. He could take any word, the etymology, break it down. This is a man who was really connected to stuff. Wonderful sense of humor, great sense of mischief. And this thing stopped him dead because he couldn't explain it. And do you know, it was interesting because we drove back when nobody said a word. And I thought, what the hell happened there? I didn't think it was evil. I really didn't think it was that, but it was something that shouldn't have been there. And I said, Ken, what did you think? And he said, it was really quite yogic. He said, these things happen. He said, why place that much importance on it? We saw it. It went, it came and it went. And what I don't know what it was. He said, I'm not psychic. And it really stayed with me for a long time. But I thought, I never, ever want to see one of those again. Ever.
And what color were its eyes?
They were almost a dull. I'm trying to think over here we have these things in the road like cat's eyes, but this was almost like that sort of red, almost like, if you look at Red Pill Junkie's avatar, that red that he's holding around the pill, it has that sort of quality to it, you know.
Yeah.
It really was. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It really was big. We were in like an old Ford Banger. They don't make them anymore because it's so long ago. And we were in this thing, and it wasn't that far off the size of it. And we couldn't see where it had come from, other than it came from the direction of the church, and it disappeared into a hedge. But it's an area where there's lots of standing stones. There are lots of old megalithic sites there, so maybe it's a hangover from that. I don't know.
It'd be interesting to see the area where it came over the wall to see if there was any kind of like what do we call it, like a ley line that went through the area.
Yeah.
You need a good dowser to get out there and trace them and see. Because I bet you. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
It was an area where a huge amount of stuff used to happen. Lots of lights in the sky. There's a fault line that runs very near to it as well.
Yeah, and what is it about red eyes? You know, that these things have.
Good question.
Red eyes. Say it again.
It's a good question. Yeah, it's almost like universality. The idea that paranormal animal cryptids have fiery, almost red eyes.
It makes you wonder if it's just because it freaks people out. It evokes a reaction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the thing is, you know, it makes you wonder. There's so many things where, if you could really see the core of what that thing is, if you saw the true nature of whatever that thing is, you probably wouldn't look anything like a dog, or it wouldn't look like an angel, or it would probably be just some sort of, I don't know, some spinning disc of light. It would probably look like a small galaxy. It would be an energy form, and we either put the rest on it, or I don't understand it. This is the thing. I've had so many things happen. I just feel lucky. I don't even count them anymore. But I'm not the only one. I could find you 20 people within psychic questing that have come from UFOs in the childhood right through lots of stuff all their life, and we are no nearer understanding it now. But it makes you look and look and look and look at everything that you can get your hands on to try and find out why. You look into disciplines that you would never explore in anything else, you know. I just love it. I really love it. It still fires me up with so much enthusiasm, even after all these years, you know.
Well, that's just it. We've only got 2 minutes before we have to go to our bottom of the hour break. But do you think though that your earlier experiences led to your later experiences? Do you think that there is a connection? If you hadn't had your earlier experiences, would you have even been capable of producing the phenomena that you found yourself involved in later?
That's a good one. Well, that's the. You see, I don't know, because one thing I've realised is we're so earthbound. We've got a body, if you're lucky, gets 70 years, and I don't know if I'm going to make that sometimes. I wake up some mornings. You've got a body which is limited by time, and that defines how we view things. There are things that happened. I mean, I don't know if I've got the time and space to do it. There are things that happened all those years later, I think definitely influenced things that came after. Cause and effect, I have no idea. But there's definitely a correlation.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, we need to get ready and go to our bottom of the hour break. And when we come back, if we don't talk about your sessions that produce the apports, I know that our listeners are going to riot and kick their sets in. So when we come back, that's what we'll do. We'll ask Charles about his experiences with the apports on Exploring the Bizarre. So stay tuned.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Final segment of Exploring the Bizarre. So, Tim, we better get right into it before we run out of time. Okay, so Charles, why don't you tell us about the sessions that you and your friends were conducting, where you started receiving the apports? I mean, what led up to that, and how was it occurring?
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Thanks. Caught into a pint pot. It's like putting my life story on the head of a pin, really. Okay. I was. My girlfriend and I. This really cuts to the chase. My girlfriend and I, Angela, set up house in a place called Corley Hall in Warwickshire, and we both sort of had a new start, basically. We got together under the same roof. She was very interested in psychic stuff. She was a really good tarot reader, good rune reader. She's still the best tarot reader I know. Her and her family had come up through the Spiritualist Church in Coventry at a place called Eagle Street. Now, my grandfather had taken me to Stourbridge Spiritualist Church when I was young. I'd grown up with all of the books that my granddad had, all of the books he'd loaned me, all the books he'd given me. So we had this very, very strong interest in anything like that. And so did Angela's sister Anne and her friend Martin, who was a family friend. And we all got together. Now, Graham Phillips, some of you might know, he's prolific. He, as an investigator, he's been there since day one, really. He's had lots of experiences. He's, to say the least, I mean, that's a shallow way to say he spent his whole life immersed in it, and he writes very good books on historical investigations into Shakespeare, all kinds of people. Now, Graham lived in that area at the time. Him and Martin Keatman had been involved in a saga called The Green Stone, which some of people might know about, and The Eye of Fire, which was the follow-up. Now, Ange knew Graham, Anne knew Graham, so did Martin, and we had mutual friends. We all had mutual friends that were from those books, from those days. And somebody said, "Come on, let's all get together," because Corley Hall, we had a huge room, which was the bedroom area, separate kitchen, separate bathroom, and very low ceilings, beams through it, everything like that. It had been there since. It was actually recorded in the Doomsday book, and
oh wow.
Yeah, I mean, this place was just phenomenal. Even the attic, I mean, the people that owned it, they gave us a grand tour once, and I've never seen anything like it before or since. Bearing in mind, it wasn't a stately home; it was a private place. it just absolutely mind-boggling, because there was work done on that house from medieval times onwards, Tudor paneling, Elizabethan paneling, bits and pieces from the 1600s into the 1800s. It was a time capsule for people that have lived there since Doomsday. We had this one place. When we got in there, very quickly, stuff started to happen. Ange and I had been involved with something to do with the revival druids up in Llanberis, which is in North Wales. We'd had seance, we'd done contacts, we'd been led to places in the countryside where there were burial urns, which there were caches of bronze spears that were found. All of this sort of Welsh, Brythonic, Druidic stuff. Now, we were closely involved with working with the landscape, standing stones, stone circles, sacred pools, all of this, because, Britain is such a small place, this tiny island off Europe, and it's crammed full of megalithic structures, absolutely crammed, and they all appear to be linked. Some are dormant, as you would call them, ley lines. It has this energy structure. If you read Tom Graves's Needles of Stone, he talks about all of this, and he talks about why some microwave towers, phone towers, are situated on nodal points within these ley lines. By design or by accident, it's not sure. It's like geomancy. Why did people put churches on a particular ley line? Maybe they didn't know why they were doing it. We were involved with all of that. We came to Corley Hall and we thought, let's do the board. This place is vibing. We could sense something going on. I'd had an apport of a tooth, which was a herbivore tooth, that landed next to my overalls. And that started to make us think, wow, something's going on. I had a very clear image one night of a figure in the room, and almost self-luminescent. If you've seen Lord of the Rings, if you've seen Galadriel, it had that appearance to it. And Angela had the same thing on the same night. And we woke up the next morning, and I said, I've seen this thing. And it seems to be sentient, intelligent, and it's, it's there. And I had this non-verbal thing going on with it. And she said, I'm going to tell you this now, and don't think I'm just making it up. Had almost exactly the same experience that night. And from then on, there was a palpable sense of something building up. And it wasn't unpleasant. It was a sense of energy build-up. And it was potential. The potential, you could almost feel the static in the air. Graham came round. By this time, we'd found 2 swords, which is another saga in itself. The swords had come to us. And when Graham Phillips walked into the room, bearing in mind, he turned away from all the stuff that had happened before to get some space from it, because it's like all of these things that you get into them, and once they escalate and the ball starts rolling, it does tend to dominate your life. The synchronicities just run riot, and you need to be out of it for a while to let the water settle, the mud to settle at the bottom of the jar, and you have some clarity if you're lucky. And he came round and looked at the swords that were on the kitchen table. And it was really funny. I can still see his face. And he asked us if we were the people that had found the swords in Milton Keynes. Now, that's Colin Padden, who I'm in contact with again. Colin's a lovely man. And he kept getting a recurring dream and saw a similar figure to the one I'd seen, the one that Angela had seen. He had 2 swords that were recovered in the landscape. Now, we started doing the board at Corley Hall. This is a really Constantine version of what happened. Before that, there were a dozen stories, which we all had to bring to the table. No pun. And I know. I'm sorry about that. And what happened was we got some contacts with bits of this and bit of that, something that, all of that. These things were residual energies from people that had possibly lived in the house, people that had made a mark in the place, left their psychic imprint on it. And very quickly they were expended. There was nothing cohesive about them. And I wonder what's left of us when we die. There might be this very faint glimmer or faint energy signature which disappears, because if you look at most human beings, and I'm not being hard when I say this, there's nothing that really holds them together that much, and throughout their whole lives it's barely held together. So when they die, there's probably not an awful lot to propel them from one lifetime to another or create another aggregate, which in Buddhism is what we are. We're an aggregate. Now, we started doing the board. it was one night when it just happened to be that everybody had got a bit of free time. Graham was available, Alan and Martin were available, and they turned up, and it was a great, So we got a drawing board, a technical drawing board, which belonged to Angela's son, and we did the letters on it in felt tip pen. We got a glass, and we sat there, and it really kicked off. So we got results pretty clear. And again, these things were almost like a bit of this. Somebody lived here in 1600. Somebody lived there in 18 something. It was very vague, but it was enough to make us think, yeah, okay, that's all we expected. And we then got this one contact after about a week, 2 weeks, possibly at the most. And it's really very, very different. Very, very different. If you met this person in the street, you get a clear sense that they knew who they were and where they were at, that they had their likes and dislikes, they had their favorite food, they had their favorite color, and music they liked and didn't like. That's the impression, that's the feeling you got from this person. And very gentle to start with. This thing was almost coy. Hello, how are you? What are you doing here? Really funny. And she said she'd been she'd lived in the house and she died there when she was about 12, 13, that she was an understairs maid. I mean, this is the one thing. I mean, I know in America, I met Americans in the last year. They've been fascinated with Downton Abbey. And I don't know why, because my whole thing is how many people, I don't think they realize that over here, those Downton Abbey represents the class system in this country. It represents the worst of it, where people that did work below stairs were treated like slaves. They were no more than indentured slaves. And this woman, this girl we were in contact with, would have been one of those, probably working 15, 18 hours a day, and at the whim of anything those people that owned the house would have wanted. And she, it happened a lot where those people didn't live that long, because they were worked to death. They weren't given the best of food. They were in, the best of conditions to live. And she came through, and it built up from there. And we had the swords on the table, and Anne had said, I spoke to her about this recently, and it seems to be a fairly accurate account. Can we have some swords? And Addie said, no, can't give you any swords. I can give you a stone. And I have mentioned this on another show, but I'll give it here for the people that didn't hear it. This is what intrigues me more than anything. We were shown time and time again how apports could be produced, and it involved lots of synchronicities. Now, in the old groups, we'd done it. We would go into the landscape following a hunch, following a bit of psychic information that might come up from you or from somebody else, and an artifact would be found in the landscape. Now, it could be that the artifact was planted some good while ago, or it was held in suspension, and when the time was right, it was manifest. Now, Anne had walked in that evening wearing a really nice shawl, and we all sat round, and Anne had said, can give us swords, and he said, no, I can give you a stone. So Addie had said to us, and her name was Addie, and I think in the photographs I sent you, there's one of Corley Hall in there.
Yes.
Some of the apples we had. Okay. Now, what had happened, she said, what colour do you want? What colour do you want the stone to be? And Anne had said, well, this colour is fantastic, this shawl. This is my favourite colour. And she said, okay. Now, we had lots of bibliomancy that John Wesley used to do. We would get the Bible, and we go thump, 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 and put our finger on it, and it would give us the one line specifically that related to what we were doing. And one of the things that came up was the fabulous gold and silver of Solomon, the blue waters of the Nile. We picked a tarot card, which was the high priestess wearing that color, the Rider-Waite pack. All of these things, small synchronicities that were found within the house, within books, within tarot cards. And then, I'm cutting this quite short, really. The board started going round and round and round the glass. And it built up and it built up. And we were struggling to keep our fingers on the glass. We were standing up around the table. And it was funny. It was just funny. It was I mean, this is really what broke the ice from being serious. And maybe we're going to look at this from a research point of view. And blah, blah, blah. We threw all of that out the window. And we thought, stuff this. Something really good is going on here. Who do we need to prove it to? Who do we need to justify it to? We're not going to get the SPR involved. We don't care. This is our gig. It's for us, and it's fun. And it kept going round and round and round, and we were laughing. The humor, the fun in all of this was fantastic. And it stopped, and Addie said, "Look." And I said, "Where?" I said, "We can't see anything." She said, "It's here." And I said, "Well, I can't see anything." And she said, "Jesus, you lot are slow tonight." And she told us to look under the table. And I still remember the shriek of delight. And Anne picked up a cabochon, a lapis lazuli cabochon, which had gold and silver flecks in it. And it matched exactly the shawl that she was wearing that she'd only bought that morning. And Addie said, "Nothing happens by chance." Do you know how many times we that played out in our lives? Nothing happens by chance.
Right.
And the pictures that you sent, which we will be able to include in the video version of this program that's put together afterwards. You sent me, like pictures of a number of objects that appeared. And you can think about the energy that has to be exerted to make these things appear, and who knows where they were taken from, So wherever they came from, they had to have been taken from one point and then brought to this other, and you said that possibly that the person or entity or whatever it was like a 12-year-old girl who had previously lived in that house. I mean, where do you think that energy could come from to be able to manifest physically like that?
This is a good one. I was thinking about this a lot today for the program, really. One of the questions that I did ask, I've been in touch with lots of the old psychic questers, the ones that are still alive, the ones that are interested. And one of the things I've asked around, the people that have had apports, and there's a few of them, did you find any adverse effects or did you find any drain on your physical energy? What Ange and I used to get is very interesting, because you're talking about human agency. You're talking about, the spirit, whatever you call it, disembodied thing. There's something there which acts as a kernel, really, like KERN. There's some more C, like something in an oyster, that things appear to aggregate around energy, ideas. It seems to build itself up and become a chimera. It has that sort of quality about it because it can be whatever you want it to be. Like you say, if you want it to be a demon, it will just perform whatever they're supposed to do. If you want it to be Jesus Christ and a host of angels, it will give you that. And, it'll give you that. It'll give you whatever you want. It'll give you jinn. It will give you aliens. It will give you time travelers. It will do anything that you want it to be to survive. When spirits... very often you contact them, they'll say, "Please remember me." It's because that form needs feeding every now and again. So you remember them and you feed it. It gives solidity. Regards, you've got something there. So that has some part to play in it. It's significant that Jeffrey Mishlov's man, was it Ted Phillips and Uri Geller?
The big came out.
Yeah. So the big came out. That's right.
Ted Owens.
You got that. His thing was that his powers came from something out there, and I think Jeffrey Mishlove said it's called a psychic crutch, and I do believe there is something in that. Ange and I used to have real problems when an apport came through, and as you see, there are just a few I sent you pictures of, and it happened to us a few times. We would get this yogic center in between the sternum, they call it the heart chakra, I think. That was the one place we would get severe a fluttering, something was moving, like there was an energy. It was a stress point when the apports were appearing, and nobody else got it at all, nobody else. Now, it's significantly, when we had the table off the ground, we had a big farmhouse table, a kitchen table, and we started getting things where that would float, and you could put your hands underneath it and put paperback books. I mean, that was quite a good thing. That really took off. But Alan Martin used to suffer from that. That took something out of them in a different way. Now, I'm curious about this because when an apport happens, it often happens, I should think a huge percentage, 98%, in the presence of a person or persons. You have to have the physical person there to mediate between whatever's going on, wherever this energy is, or it coalesces around an idea. I have no idea how these things work, but the synchronicities appear to be important. This is a long rambling way of saying I have no more idea now than I had then, but I have intuitive little insights every now and again that I can't find the words for. I don't know if there are any. I know how it's changed my perspective on quantum entanglement to all kinds of things,
Right.
But how they manifested, and I don't know, but it has to be through people. And if people are capable of doing that, I mean, I've seen these things, these declassified files the CIA put out. They're on. You go on Google and you can Google them, and the Chinese children that are able to manifest to apparently dissolve a physical object and have it reappear in somebody else's hand in the next room. And this seems to be quite well documented. The Chinese psychic children, and I could believe that. I could really well believe that with the history of Taoism and Chinese alchemy and qi and things like that. I think they'd be I think they'd be very, very capable of producing it. And I think there are probably experiments going on a lot, really. But as far as the apports go, we had an awful lot, and it did take quite a bit out of us, and it caused a huge amount of argument sometimes because physically it had an effect on us, emotionally and mentally. But it was a short thing.
We're running towards the midnight hour here, Tim.
Yep. Yeah. So and we're going to have Charles and Red Pill Junkie back on again to add flesh out these stories just a little bit. So
some great, incredible material. I might say.
All right, so gentlemen, we want our listeners to know a little bit more about where they can find out more about you. So, Red Pill Junkie, let's start with you. Online presence, things like that.
All right, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, the two of us, for having us. It was a great discussion. Yeah, you can, if you can find me firstly at the Daily Grail, www.dailygrail.com is where I contribute as a news administrator and one of the writers. And I also occasionally write for Mysterious Universe, mysteriousuniverse.org, and I also semi-regularly participate in the roundtables organized by Seraya Asketh on his Where Did the Road Go podcast. And I also have a personal website, absurdbydesign.com, which is where I put some links together and also where I show some of my designs and artworks that I do as commissions.
All right. Very good.
And Charles, you have your own podcast?
I do now, yes. I owe quite a few people. After doing the show with Greg and Miguel, quite a few people said you should have your own podcast and you should get stuff out because there are so many stories. My story, don't forget there were 5 people around that table, is just one of many. I mean, really, some of them are fantastic. Some of them are far more interesting than the ones I've got. And I'm not being modest or self-effacing about that. It's true. I've got people that were in on the Greenstone and the Eye of Fire who saw stuff that I can't even contemplate. So I want to interview them. I want it to be an archive for psychic questing, which even in the UK is still pretty much a dark secret. It's one of the biggest kept secrets ever. And that's, look at any books by Andy Collins and look at any books by Graham Phillips, and there's other people out there. I'd really, really like to get it together. So the questinghour.com will be, the first show will be up there on December the 21st, which is winter solstice here. It's already up.
Very good.
Okay, it's already up.
Okay, just got to remind listeners, YouTube channel, Mr. UFO's Secret Files, and the George Hunt Williamson book, The Sorcerers Speak is available on Amazon.com. Look for the edition published by Inner Light Global Communications, because that's us. And it was a great show, a great night, and we will continue on searching for the truth about the most bizarre matters in the entire universe.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.